He was the general who broke the Confederacy, the man who stood beside Lincoln, and the quiet soldier who became President of the United States. Ulysses S. Grant, hero of the Union symbol of victory and paradox of history. Behind the legend of the Civil War commander and two-term president lay a man devoted not just to country, but to family. His public triumphs and private battles were mirrored in the lives of his 4 children, who inherited both the prestige of his name and the burden of his shadow. They were born in the turbulent mid-19th century, raised amid military posts, White House dinners, and the fall from political grace that came with their father's final years. Some would rise to prominence in their own right. Others would struggle under the weight of expectation, and all would feel the echo of a father who embodied both greatness and humility. Tonight we count down from number 4 to number 1, the 4 children of Ulysses S. Grant, and the surprising ways in which each carried forward, transformed, or quietly resisted the legacy of America's most misunderstood general. Number 4. Frederick Dent Grant. Frederick Dent Grant was born on May 30, 1850 in St. Louis, Missouri, the first child of Ulysses S. Grant and Julia Dent Grant. Named for his mother's influential family, Frederick came into the world before his father was famous, before U.S. Grant became the symbol of Union victory. Yet, by the time he was a teenager, his father's rise from obscurity to national hero had made the name Grant both a legacy and a test. Frederick would spend his life trying to live up to it. He was 15 when his father took command of the Union armies. Too young to fight yet, too restless to stay home, Frederick accompanied General Grant to the front, serving as an unofficial aide-de-camp during the final months of the Civil War. He witnessed firsthand the brutal cost of victory, Appomattox, the surrender, and the end of the bloodiest war in American history. For the rest of his life, he would speak of those moments not with pride, but with awe, as though still haunted by their weight. After the war, Frederick attended West Point, following his father's path into the U.S. Army. His career was respectable, but complicated by comparisons to his father's legend. He served bravely during the Indian Wars and later in the Spanish-American War, earning distinction for courage under fire. Yet promotion came slowly, shadowed by whispers that his achievements were due more to his surname than his merit. Determined to prove himself, he accepted difficult assignments, from frontier postings to diplomatic missions abroad. In 1899, he was appointed U.S. Minister to Austria-Hungary by President McKinley, a post that suited his intelligence and social grace. He later returned to military service as a brigadier general in the Philippines, where he helped suppress insurgencies during America's controversial colonial campaigns. His long years of service eventually earned him respect on his own terms. Frederick's personal life was steadier than most of his siblings. In 1874, he married Ida Marie Honore, the daughter of a prominent Chicago family and the sister of Bertha Palmer, one of the wealthiest women of the Gilded Age. The match elevated him socially, giving him the wealth and security his father had once lacked. They had 2 children, including Ulysses S. Grant III, who would later serve as a general in World War II, extending the family's military legacy into a new century. Frederick Dent Grant died suddenly in 1912 at the age of 61 while still on active duty. He was buried at West Point beside his parents, a soldier to the end. Of all the Grant children, Frederick most resembled his father in discipline and quiet pride, a man who carried the Grant name not as burden or boast, but as an inheritance to be honored through service. Number 3. Ulysses S. Grant Jr. Ulysses S. Grant Jr., known throughout his life as Buck, was born in 1852 in Bethel, Ohio, during a time when his father was still a modest officer struggling for stability. Unlike his elder brother Frederick, who pursued a soldier's life, Buck sought his fortune in the world of law business and real estate fields, where intellect and timing could matter more than command. Yet as the son and namesake of one of America's most celebrated generals and presidents, his life would forever be a tightrope between legacy and self-definition. He was just a boy when the Civil War ended and his father became president. The White House of the 1870s was both a home and a gilded cage for the Grant children. Buck grew up surrounded by political intrigue and privilege, witnessing both the glory and the scandal of his father's administration. He inherited his father's calm demeanor, But his mother's social poise, and by early adulthood, he had become a well-educated and ambitious young man. After attending Harvard and Columbia Law School, Buck embarked on a career in law and business that mirrored the restless energy of post-war America. He first practiced law in New York, then turned to real estate speculation in California, where booming cities and railroads promised wealth for those willing to gamble. Like many of his era, he found success and disaster in equal measure. Buck's ventures were bold, sometimes reckless, and though he often profited handsomely, financial crises frequently undid his gains. He founded the U.S. Grant Investment Company and later developed hotels and land holdings in San Diego, including the famed U.S. Grant Hotel, named in honor of his father. The construction of that hotel became his life's obsession, a monument not just to his father's memory, but to the enduring pride of the Grant name. Yet the project nearly bankrupted him. He fought creditors and lawsuits for years before finally completing it in 1910, 2 years before his brother Frederick's death. The Grand Hotel still stands today as a symbol of resilience, a marble and glass echo of Buck's relentless ambition. In contrast to the stoic, soldierly path of his siblings, Buck's life was defined by risk and reinvention. He married Fanny Chaffee, daughter of Senator Jerome Chaffee of Colorado, in 1880, forming an alliance that bridged the worlds of politics and business. Together they raised 5 children, including Ulysses S. Grant IV, who would later become a distinguished scientist and professor at UCLA, proof that the Grant legacy had evolved beyond the battlefield into the realm of intellect and innovation. Ulysses S. Grant Jr. died in 1929 at the age of 77 in San Diego, a self-made man who had refused to live in the shadow of his father's fame. Though he never wore a uniform, his life embodied another kind of courage, the courage to dream, to fail, and to begin again. Where his father conquered with armies, Buck fought with persistence, and in the end, both men left monuments that bore their name, one of stone at Appomattox and one of glass on the Pacific coast. Number 2. Ellen Wrenshall Grant. Ellen Wrenshall Grant was born on July 4, 1855. In the shadow of a rising star, the daughter of Ulysses and Julia Grant, and the only girl among 4 children. Her birth on Independence Day seemed symbolic, as if destiny had tied her to the patriotic pulse of her father's life. Yet being the daughter of the Union's victorious general and later a sitting president meant growing up in a world where privacy barely existed. From an early age, Ellen, known to family and friends as Nellie, was the darling of the White House, admired for her beauty, grace, and charm. But her story would unfold as both a social fairy tale and a cautionary tale of love and loss. When her father entered the presidency in 1869, Nellie was 14, and the nation adored her as its princess of the new Republican court. Newspapers breathlessly covered her coming of age, her education, her gowns, and every public appearance. In a Washington still healing from war, the young first daughter symbolized renewal and hope, the child of victory, as one newspaper called her. But behind the elegance of receptions and diplomatic teas, Nellie was restless and romantic, yearning for something beyond ceremony. In 1874, at just 18, she married Algernon Sartoris, a British-born diplomat and member of an aristocratic family. The wedding, held in the East Room of the White House, was one of the most lavish of the 19th century, attended by hundreds and reported around the world. For the press, it was a fairy tale, America's beloved daughter marrying into European nobility. But reality proved far darker. Sartoris was handsome and charming, and also a gambler and alcoholic. Within years, their marriage began to fracture under the strain of scandal and his infidelity. Nellie bore 4 children and endured a turbulent life in England, separated from her family and homeland. Her father, then retired and struggling financially, wrote letters pleading for her happiness, though he could do little to change her fate. When General Grant died in 1885, Nellie returned to the United States for his funeral, her marriage already collapsing. A decade later, after Sartoris's death, she finally came home for good. Back in America, she rebuilt her life with quiet dignity, supported by her mother, Julia. In 1912, at age 57, Nellie married Frank Hatch Jones, a wealthy Chicago banker. The union was happy but brief. She was widowed again a few years later. Her later life was spent quietly between Washington and Chicago, occasionally appearing at memorial events for her father, where she was greeted with affection and nostalgia by those who remembered her White House days. Ellen Wrenshall Grant died in 1922 at the age of 67, a woman whose life had mirrored the grandeur and vulnerability of her family's name. Her story moved from the glittering ballroom of the presidency to the lonely halls of exile and back again. Through heartbreak and endurance, Nellie remained what she had always been, her father's daughter, dignified under pressure, loyal to family, and unwilling to let sorrow define her. Number 1. Jesse Root Grant. Jesse Root Grant was born on February 6, 1858, at the height of his father's early military career. By the time he could walk, the Civil War had already transformed Ulysses S. Grant into a national hero. And by the time he reached adolescence, his father was President of the United States. Jesse grew up in the White House, a boy surrounded by soldiers, statesmen, and the roar of public expectation. He was the youngest and most spirited of the Grant children, often described as clever, mischievous, and charmingly unfiltered. Yet beneath his humor and confidence was a young man grappling with what it meant to carry one of the most revered names in America. While his brothers followed the paths of military service and business, Jesse's ambitions were restless. After attending Phillips Exeter Academy and Columbia College, he tried his hand at several pursuits: law, engineering, and eventually business. But it was his association with the financial world that defined his early adulthood and nearly destroyed him. In 1884, when his father's fortune collapsed in the infamous Grant and Ward scandal, Jesse was among those who watched helplessly as the family lost everything. He saw his father, the former president, humiliated by the fraud of his business partner, Ferdinand Ward. It was during this dark period that Jesse learned the brutal lesson his father had already lived: fame offers no protection from failure. After Ulysses S. Grant's death in 1885, Jesse's life took a quieter, though no less eventful course. He traveled to California, then to New York, and eventually abroad, working in mining, railroads, and investments. He proved resourceful and resilient, rebuilding his own finances through a series of ventures in Mexico and the western United States. Yet even as he reinvented himself, Jesse struggled with the public's perception. To the press, he was the general's boy, a man whose every success was attributed to his last name and every misstep amplified by it. In 1896, he married Elizabeth Chapman, daughter of Admiral A.H. Chapman, and together they had 2 children. Jesse became known as the most outspoken of the Grant offspring, unafraid to challenge the myth of his father when he believed history had simplified it. In 1925, he published In the Days of My Father, General Grant, a candid memoir that offered both affection and frank critique. He portrayed his father as a man of immense willpower, but human vulnerabilities, a soldier who despised war, and a president who mistrusted politics. The book, though controversial at the time, remains one of the most intimate portrayals of Ulysses S. Grant ever written. Jesse lived well into the 20th century, long enough to see his father's reputation shift from scandal to reverence. He died in 1934 at the age of 76 in Los Altos, California. Among the 4 Grant children, Jesse was the last to pass away, the final witness to the rise, fall, and redemption of the family name. He had inherited neither his father's command nor his brother's stability, but something rarer, a willingness to see the truth beneath the legend. In the end, Jesse Root Grant's greatest act was to remind America that heroes are men first and myths only after. The story of Ulysses S. Grant's 4 children is the story of how a family carried the weight of a nation's triumph and its trials into the modern age. Each child born in the long shadow of war faced the impossible task of living up to a father whose life had already become legend. And yet, through their different paths, they revealed the full dimension of the Grant legacy: courage, not only in battle, but in endurance, reinvention, and truth. Frederick Dent Grant carried the soldier's mantle with dignity, serving his country on foreign fields, and proving that the name Grant still commanded respect in uniform. Ulysses S. Grant, Jr. Buck built monuments not of marble, but of ambition. A self-made man who sought to turn his father's heroism into prosperity on the American frontier. Ellen Wrenshall Grant, the cherished daughter, embodied both the grace and heartbreak of her lineage. her life a testament to the power and peril of love under the public eye. And Jesse Root Grant, the youngest, became the family's final voice, unafraid to humanize the hero and remind the world that his father's greatness was born of perseverance, not perfection. Together they traced the evolution of America itself, from the smoke of Appomattox to the glitter of the Gilded Age, from the battlefields of a divided country to the skyscrapers of a new century. Their lives, marked by ambition, resilience, and reflection, ensured that Ulysses S. Grant's legacy would endure not merely in history books, but in the blood and will of those who bore his name. By the time Jesse Root Grant passed away in 1934, the Civil War had become memory, and his father had been transformed from a controversial president into a symbol of national unity. The Grant children, in their different ways, carried him there, not by rewriting history, but by living through it. And so, as history closes over their generation, it leaves behind not just the image of a general on horseback, but the echo of a family that learned through triumph and failure alike that true victory lies in the endurance of legacy.